Okay, so we're going to get started on exercise 204, and the hope is that VRay works for everybody on all their computers. If not, we're going to try to move you around to make sure we get a working version of VRay. Like I said last class, I find it more useful if we weave VRay in. And so thus far you've been working hard in Rhino, trying to learn the basic commands and whatever, and then I'm going to throw something completely out of left field at you, which is VRay. But at the same time, as we start to stack these things together, it'll start to make more sense as to why I want you to be in it first. When I first started teaching this class and was creating it from scratch, I did all the Rhino in the beginning, and then we did all VRay. And the truth is that if you do it that way, when you get into VRay, it just starts to drive you nuts. And you have to do some modeling, or you have to do something to distract you. So little bits of VRay work better than intensive VRay. So we're going to do little bits of VRay. So today we're actually going to start doing some basic VRay stuff, and I'm going to talk through the options and explain a bunch of stuff about VRay to get us going. So before we get into that, we need a brand new file, and in that brand new file we're going to create 5 objects. I don't really care the sizes of the objects or what the objects are, but these objects are what we're going to put materials on so you can see how materials work in the first place. So I'm going to go over, I am in inches by default. I'm going to go to the preset shapes, which are right here on the left side, and we'll start with just a box. And in the perspective view, let's go ahead and make that. I'm going to create just a little composition with a few things. So let's go into shaded mode. There's my box. Let's see, what else can we, hidden underneath here, let's make, I don't know, a cylinder. That sounds good. All right, we'll make a little cylinder. And we'll make like a pyramid-looking thing. And if you have a few extras, no big deal. Hold on a second, let me do that one again. If they intersect a bit, that might not be a bad thing either, so you can see how they play off one another. And let's do a cone, sure. We'll do a cone too. So what our composition of shapes is doesn't really matter, but we need some shapes to kind of start with. Okay, and you guys are all creating shapes rather quickly, so I'm happy. Okay, so we're going to start with those 5 objects, and then we're going to start working with materials on those objects to learn what how the materials apply and what they look like. But before that, we have to start to set up a few things to get our scene ready. One problem is when I created this donut, the donut is not sitting on the ground, it's below the ground. So I want to adjust that. I can do that in one of the side views. Probably that's the easiest way. So there it is in the side view, and I could just drag it up so that it's even with the ground. The precision doesn't matter here. Okay. I could also type move and then type V for vertical and move it that way. But for right now, we just need it close by. Okay. So I have this basic setup. Now I'm going to go ahead and begin. I'm actually going to skip step 2, and we'll come back to that. But I'm going to do step 3, 4, and 5 right now. First thing under step 3 is we need some kind of ground to exist for VRay to render against. By default, it's as if it's in space, it's in a vacuum, and everything is black behind us. So we want there to be some ground. And we're going to do that by creating what's called a VRay infinite plane. And on the VRay toolbar, next to the R and the RT is like a little plane with arrows going off of it. Okay, it's right up there. If you click on that, it will drop this plane, i.e. ground, into your scene. So there's the ground. This does not end at this object. It's a special kind of object. This is just representative of the infinite plane, which basically means that this plane goes off into infinity in all directions. So there is now fundamentally a flat piece of ground to the horizon in our scene, which is what we're after. So I have a flat piece of ground to the horizon that's been put in the scene. We did that by clicking on this infinite plane tool. The key command, if you wanted to type it in, is vis infinite plane, VIS infinite plane. Though remembering that is a lot harder than just clicking on the button for infinite plane. So I've gone ahead and I've created that infinite plane, It is below my objects because it's on the ground. Okay? And now that I have that, I'll move on to part 4, which is to create a basic directional light. And so by default right now in this scene, we have no lights of any kind. And so if we were to do a rendering, there would be some global illumination, which is just like ambient light. But there's no directional light. There wouldn't be any shadows or anything like that. So we're going to create a directional light for ourselves. And so to create that, what I recommend doing, I think this is the easiest way of creating a directional light, is I'm going to start with a box. And I'll draw a little box in my scene like that. And I'm going to use this box as a guide for my directional light. The next piece is I'm going to pick directional light. And now here's the tricky part. So the VRay toolbar has a hidden light that doesn't show up. Right? So if you move your mouse right next to the last light, which is an IES light, there's an empty little button. Okay? That's the directional light button. Go figure, I didn't write the program. Okay? That's what we want, is the directional light. You can also type in directional light. And it's going to ask first for the end of the light direction vector. Okay? So I'm going to click on this corner of my box. Then it's going to ask me for the start of my light direction vector. I'm going to click on the opposite upper corner of my light, or of my box. And what I end up with is this light that is on a nice little diagonal shining down. Okay? This doesn't work like a spotlight. It works like a sun, so to speak, in that it's infinitely big and it's shining uniform light in all in one direction. So where it is placed in your scene makes no difference. It's just the direction that the light is shining. After I have that established, I'll go ahead and take my box and press the delete key. And then that little light is just going to float there in space. Okay? So I have a directional light that's been established. It's right there. Notice that the symbol doesn't get smaller or bigger. It stays the same size, whether you zoom in or zoom out. Right? It's because it's just symbolic of the light. It's not the light itself. Okay, so I have a directional light. And the last thing that I'm going to do to make my life easy is I'm going to save the view so that I can keep rendering this same view over and over again. Okay? So I'll establish the view. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm happy. Now that I have the view, I will click on this little triangle. I'm going to go to Set View, Named Views. And then I'll click the little Save As icon. And we can call it, let's call it Perspective 2. Or let's call it Render for clarity. I'll call it Render. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And that view is then saved. The advantage here is that if I zoom around and I move, I can come back to Set View. There's Render listed. And it'll always jump me back to that same view. Okay? Doing it at this stage is not critical. Could we do renderings where the views change? Sure. Down the road, when we get into your more advanced renderings, your final renderings, it's important to establish these saved views. And when you make changes or you evolve your building or whatever, you have the same view that goes on your final poster. You're just making subtle changes to what the textures look like or whatever. So the view is fixed, and you're always just re-rendering and making changes. Because when we get to that point, you're going to do 10 renderings trying to find the right settings. And you don't want to keep going back to, well, what was that view that I liked? Right? You save that view, and then you can re-render and re-render and re-render as you adjust settings. Okay? So I now have my saved view. I have my directional light, and I have my infinite plane below the object, which is exactly what I'm after. Okay? Now I'm going to go back in time, and we're going to go to step 2, which is setting up our basic VRay options. By the way, everything that I've done is referenced on the website. So, for example, 8.5 infinite plane, there's the walkthrough, right? The directional light, there's the walkthrough for the directional light. This logo changed. It's the one at the end. This was the old version of the piece. And then we'll go through the rest of these. But my point is that they are all there. So if you got lost or something, you can go back and reference it. Okay, so now we need to go through the basic VRay options. And so I'm going to go ahead and start by clicking on the O. It's a little tag, yellow tag with an O on it, for VRay options. Okay, so I'll click on that, and it brings up the VRay Options Editor. Okay? And with the VRay Options Editor open, you say, yeah, that's not too bad. Okay? It's just a small dialog box, no big deal. Okay? The problem here is that every one of these little buttons, or I like to refer to them as a drawer, has a ton of options inside it. Right? So if we start to expand this, right, let's expand this one. Right? You can see that these options just grow and grow and grow. And understanding and knowing what all of these options do is very, very hard. Okay? The good news for you is there's not too many that you really need to know. You can get pretty decent results without knowing all of them. Right? And I try my best to distill down the ones that are important and the ones that aren't. So we're going to start today talking about global switches, which is the first little drawer that we open. And we'll go through most of the defaults are fine. I want to point out a few kind of key things as part of this. Okay? So under geometry, we don't care. Under lighting, we want to make sure that the lights are in fact on. Okay, that's important. And then this one, hidden lights should be off. So if you turn a light off, if you hide a light, you want it off. Right? So we make sure that by default, lights are on, hidden lights are off. We, of course, do want to show shadows. That's important. And we want to make sure that show GI only is unchecked. So that what that is asking is, do you want me to supersede all lights in the scene with just kind of a global ambient light? And we don't want that. Okay? So we make sure that that is checked off. And you see that I've made sure that that is bold on your sheet. In the old version of VRay, it used to be on by default. And so you always had to turn it off. They got smart and they turned it off by default. So we're OK. Okay? So, of course, we wouldn't want don't render the final image checked. That defeats the purpose. Okay? And low thread priority checked is good. We don't worry about batch rendering. And we do want to show the progress window. So basically, all of those are set fine. On the right side, we have some basic properties of materials. And again, all of the defaults are just fine. You do want to make sure that override materials is unchecked. This supersedes all materials with another material. There is a point in the semester where we will actually turn it on, and I'll show you that down the road. Okay? And our secondary ray tracing bias is fine. So basically, under global switches, I didn't actually have to change anything. But I like to walk through those basic settings. Okay? After I've done the global switches, I'm going to come a little bit further down to a drawer called Output. And under the Output drawer, right, I have the ability to specify a width and height in pixels of my rendering. Okay? Now, one of the weird things here is that the rendering is different sized than what we see on the screen. I like to, what I see is what I get when I render. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this button for Get View Aspect. Okay, and it changes the image aspect ratio. And we now see that I have a width of 800 and a height of 383. And that matches up with my window. Yours will be probably slightly different than that. That's fine. If we want to permanently lock that aspect ratio, we can click the little L button here. And it'll be set at that. Okay? And so 800 by 383 is perfectly fine for this exercise. I'm happy. Okay? So I have the output section set. And the rest of it is all fine by default. Okay? So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close the VRay option editor like that. And now it's time to actually start working with materials. So we've moved on to part 2 of the exercise 204 for today. And as we start to work through our materials, first thing we want to do is explore general material properties. Okay? So I'm going to follow VRay 8.2 to assign a basic material to each object. Now for today, I'm going to assign each object a material individually. When you start going a little bit further in Rhino and VRay, you're going to have a layer called walls, for example. You're going to want all your walls to have a specific material applied. It doesn't make sense to apply by individual object. You have 100 walls. Don't click on all of them, right? Put them on the walls layer and apply the material to the layer. But for today, we have 5 objects, easier to apply each a material. So I'm going to open up the VRay Materials Editor, which is I get to it by clicking on this M button in my VRay toolbar. And that brings up the VRay Material Editor. And so fundamentally in this window, what we have is we have a preview, which is shown in this gray square with the X. Obviously, the X goes away if there's a material. And then below it, we have a materials list. It says scene materials, and any material in our scene will show up as a drop-down from here. Okay, right now I have no materials in my scene, therefore there's no material showing. There is also a little checkbox for live update. I'll tell you right now, if you leave that checked, it's very likely VRay will crash. So leave it unchecked. Save yourself the hassle. Okay? So under scene materials, if I click on it and then right-click on it, I can create a new material. And we'll talk about loading pre-made materials in a little bit. But for right now, we're going to create a material from scratch. And so I'll go to Create Material, and I just want a standard material. There are other types of materials in here, none of which we're going to worry about. We're going to stick with standard for right now. And we see that when I create the standard, it is now a sub-material from our generic scene materials. So there it is under Default Material. Before I get further, I would like to rename this. So I'm going to double-click on it and change it from Default Material, and I'll call it Red. I'm going to start with the basic colors. Okay? So we'll call it Red. And now, much like any of the rest of the VRay options, we have the same kind of little setup with drawers. And so I have 3 drawers that are related to the red material. The first one is diffuse, the second one is options, and the third one is maps. Okay? We're going to start in just the diffuse drawer for a second. Diffuse refers to basic color and transparency settings. Nothing more than that. So we'll start under diffuse, and we'll look at color, and I'm going to change the color from being gray to being red. And I'll say OK. And at this point, if I were to preview this material, I get rid of the X, and I see a red material showing up. Okay? So I'll take this red material, and I'm going to apply it to one of my shapes. So I'll select one of the shapes. I'll right-click on the red material, and I'll say Apply Material to Selection. All right? So now that red material is, in fact, applied to that shape. Now, it would be nice, I'm going to close the VRay material editor for a second, to see a preview of what that material looks like. And I can do that by clicking on the triangle right up here and changing to rendered view, which will give me, you can see there's some shadows, and it gives me kind of a basic, that's what my material looks like. I will caution you, however, in that your materials don't always display how they will render in this view. It's just a preview. It's to help you set up materials. That's it. So let's move on and create another material. So I'll go to my material editor again. I'll go to Scene Materials. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to say Create Material Standard. So this time, I'm going to double-click, and we'll rename this, I don't know, how about blue? And we'll say OK. And the blue material, I'm going to once again go to the diffuse drawer, change the color to be blue. And I don't want the dark blue. I'm going to pick something a little bit lighter. Let me come down here and pick a lighter blue. All right. And if I were to preview it, there's my material. So once again, I can select another shape. How about this one? We'll right-click on blue. We'll say Apply Material to Selection, and we see that that changes. So we're going to continue this process. I'll go back to Scene Materials. I'll right-click and say Create Material, Standard. And we'll add another material. We'll call this one green. And I'll say OK. I'll come back to the diffuse drawer. I'll click on Color, and I'll change the material to green. So let's assign green to this shape. I'll right-click and say Apply Material to Selection. Now that's green. And I'm going to continue to work my way through the rest of these objects. So once again, Scene Materials, right-click, Create Material, Standard. Maybe this one will be orange. Obviously, pick whatever colors you want. I'm just picking, standard colors. And so let's pick orange. And let's apply orange to this one. So I'll right-click on orange, Apply Material to Selection. Now that one's orange. One more time. We'll create material, standard. Let's do a pink one for my daughter. course, that would be her favorite color. And we'll do violet. How about violet? Sure, that looks like it's a good color. And this brings up a really good, well, it went away. Every once in a while in VRay, you'll see your menu and everything will turn gray on you. It'll be like a light gray. VRay has a tendency to do that, and it'll like temporarily crash for a couple seconds. And that's just normal. Sorry. So bear with it, and it'll come back. If it doesn't come back, there's ways of getting around it. The good news is you can always access your Rhino file, save it, open it again. Okay? So I have it as pink. Let me right-click and apply it to this layer, or this cone. Let me apply material to selection. There it is as pink. So now, with my material editor closed, I just closed that. I have all of my shapes assigned. I'm going to go ahead and perform my first actual rendering. And so right here, I'm going to come across to the R, the blue R. And when I click that blue R, VRay will open up, and it will process my file. So this final rendering looks a lot different than the preview version. Okay, so like I said, the preview is an approximation. The final version here looks a little bit better. Notice that we're getting shadows on all of our objects. That is because of our light. Okay? And we can see how the objects interact because of those shadows. So I want to make sure that I save this because we're going to be posting multiple files today. This is the first one. So to save it, there's a floppy disk icon in the center. Why this is the universal symbol of save, I have no idea, because nobody uses disks anymore, right? But it is what it is. So we're going to click that. It's the single disk, not the multi-disks. I'm going to click the single disk, and I'm going to put it on my flash drive in a place that I can find it, hopefully. So let me get in there. Let me go into today's folder. Let me create a new folder for spring of 2017. And so this is render -01. And I'll go ahead and save it. Okay, so that was my first render. Now that I have my first render, I'm going to start to edit some of the material properties of some of the pieces so that we can see what happens and what options I have that are available as part of this rendering. Okay, so I'm moving on to adjust the transparency of two of the objects. So I'm going to open up my VRay material editor, which is the M again. And at this point, the materials are already applied. So when I make a change to one of the materials here, it will automatically go on to whatever object has that material applied to it. So let's use the red as one example. So I've picked red. And now, under the diffuse drawer, we already adjusted the color, but I'm going to adjust the transparency. And so you see right now that it has a transparency of black. The way transparency works in VRay is black is solid, white is fully transparent, and you won't see anything. So a gray value between black and white will control how much transparency this has. So if I switch under transparency, if I click on it, and I switch from black to dark gray, and say OK, and then I click on preview, we'll see that now my red has some transparency to it. Okay? And we can see it update here. I have a little bit of transparency there. So let's pick another object. I'll go with my green. So I'll go to green. I'll go to transparency again. And this time, I'm going to pick the just gray. And I'll say OK. And now if I preview it, it's almost see-through. Okay? For you, it's more see-through than for me. So now that I've done that to two objects, I'll go ahead and go back, and I'll do my render. So I'll go to the R, I'll click on render, and you'll see that the render slows down a little bit. And that's because it's calculating transparency as part of it. OK, so if we look at this image, we see that the red is transparent. We can see through it. We see that the green is very transparent, and we can see through that. But you guys see, let me zoom in a little bit here. You see the bottom of this green? See how we have kind of a dark green, and then we have these weird splotches? that are happening. Okay? These splotches are a telltale sign that you have two surfaces that are exactly coplanar. So remember I created that infinite plane, right? The collision between the infinite plane and the bottom of this transparent object is causing VRay to have issues. It's saying, well, wait a minute, which one do you want me to draw? Do you want the solid? Do you want the transparent? I don't know what to do. So I'm going to make an adjustment, and then I'm going to move my infinite plane down just a little bit. And I can do that in two ways. I can, with it selected, which it is now, I can type move, V for vertical, and drop it just a little bit, like that. Or I can look at it in one of the side views. Let me back up a second. There it is, coplanar. And I could just drag it down ever so slightly so that it's below my objects. Okay? And all it takes is a tiny bit of separation between those. So you can see that those are almost on top of each other, but not quite. If I go back to my rendering, and I render again, that collision that happened, that dark green collision, has gone away. So we just have to make sure that those surfaces are not right on top of each other. And then we end up with a good rendering. So let me zoom out a little bit. There we go. And so we see this with transparency applied. I'll go ahead and save this as my next version. So I have render 1. We'll call this render 2. And I'll go ahead and save. Okay? So the next piece of this is we're going to play around with reflections. Okay? So thus far, our materials are perfectly matte. They're not reflecting anything. It's as if we just had a plastic object that had no shine to it whatsoever. Now we're going to go into our materials and we're going to add some shine. So let's start. I'm going to start with the purple object, or the pink object here. And in order to add a shine, we're actually going to add a layer to the material. And so if you look here at the pink object, if I click on the plus sign next to it, the only layer for the pink material is diffuse. And that's where we assign that it was pink. If I right-click on pink, I can create a layer for reflection. And if I create a reflection layer, I now will have pink, reflection, and diffuse. So I get both. So at the same time, I have diffuse as a drawer, but I also get reflection as a drawer. Okay? And so simply by adding that reflection, if I were to preview it, my objects turn shiny, and we see a few little reflections as part of my object. Okay? I have more precise controls relating to reflection, and I can get to those by clicking the capital M next to reflection. And if I click that capital M, I'll get some options here. And so right here under IOR, index of refraction, I get a specific value. So in this case, it's 1.55. Okay? And we're going to adjust that value in a second. But let's go through and create a few more shiny objects before we adjust that value. So we'll leave it at 1.55. Let me add a shine to blue. So I'll right-click and say Create Layer, Reflection. Let me go ahead and take my red. I'll right-click, Create Layer, Reflection. And I don't know, let's do it for green too. Why not? Right-click, Create Layer, Reflection. So now I have reflections on these layers. Okay? And I'll go ahead and close my material editor, and then we'll go ahead and render again. And so the speed with which VRay renders goes down again, because we're adding complexity to the materials. And you can see this happen. So it's not only calculating transparency through an object, but it's calculating the reflection of the transparency through an object. All right, so there it is with some reflection. And so you can start to see in these objects the various, so in the blue object you get a reflection of the red object. In the orange object No, the orange object you don't, but in the blue object you get a reflection of the orange object right there. And it's altering the colors. In the side of this green object, you're getting a reflection of the pink object, right? So it's adding these reflections. So let's go ahead and save that, and we'll call this render 3. And I'll click save. So now I have render 3 saved. I'm going to go back into the material editor. Let's close this. And now I'm going to adjust the index of refraction for 3 of those 4 materials. Okay? So I'll go back to pink. I'll go to reflection. I'll click on the M. And I'm going to change the index of refraction for the particular material. Okay? The index of refraction is a known value for a given material. So if you know of a, let me see if here's material reflection. All right, I think I have it written down here. Maybe it's in the book. If you look up index of refraction, right, here's our refractive index on Wikipedia. And okay, so here we're looking at a quick little look here. So window glass 1.52, right? Diamond 2.42. Okay, so it's a different reflection or refraction of light. Okay, air 1.000293. Right, so there's a little bit in air, but not enough to notice. So the point is, a true vacuum would be an index of 1, so no refraction at all. Okay? So the point is that these vary depending on a particular material. If you had a particular material you were trying to mimic, let's say you were trying to render a diamond, you of course would want the material to have the correct index of refraction. Okay? So for right now, we're just going to change some of the values. It doesn't matter what they are. So I started with pink. Right? Let's go to a diamond, 2.42. Right? And we'll go ahead and say OK. And if we look at it, oops, sorry, if we look at it, it's very reflective. Okay? We'll change some of the other ones. Let's go to green, and let's change that to 1.52. That would be glass. Red here. All right, let's drop that way down. Let's go like 0.75, for example. And then we'll go ahead and render this scene again. So our pink should be very, very reflective. Our green is similar to what it was before, and our red shouldn't be as reflective. It should be more dull. Right? So the point is that that value changes how reflective a material is. There we go. So I'll go ahead and save this as render 4. Right? The next piece is to change the reflective glossiness, which is another way of adjusting the reflection. I'll once again go to materials. Let's go ahead and pick the red one. And under reflection, we can come down to glossiness. Right? There it is. We can adjust that. We'll say 0.5. If we were to preview it, we can see what it looks like. It's kind of a matte finish. It has a little bit of reflection. It would be kind of like a plastic. Like if you looked at the side of your computer, there's a little bit of reflection off of it, but it's not a sharp reflection. It's not like glass. And then we'll change, I don't know, let's change the blue. And we'll change the reflection glossiness to be 0.75, something like that. And if we were to preview it, there it is, kind of like a plastic. And then we'll go ahead and render again. you will notice that with VRay, there's always lots of hurry up and waits. Do all this stuff and then wait. Almost done. There we go. So now I'll go ahead and save this one, and I end up with render 5. So the truth is that creating a material from scratch, while possible, takes a lot of work. You have to do a lot of trial and error, and you really have to think about a particular material. We will talk through how to create a material from scratch because sometimes the material that you want just really doesn't exist. Other times, however, materials already exist. Somebody's already spent the time to create a particular material, and you can use that instead of creating it from scratch. And so, as part of the course website, if you're logged in, you can go to the Resources menu and come down to VRay Materials Library, right? And we'll go ahead and go to Downloadable Resource Packages. Right? You could also skip to it right here under Downloadable Resource Packages. The advantage here is that under the Archie 136, I already have a zip archive of your VRay materials. Okay? So if we click this, we can start the download process. It will take you to a Dropbox page because they're hosting it. No thanks, just continue to view it, and that gives us the ability to download the file. Okay? 119 megabytes zipped. So it's a big file. Okay? And we'll let it download. Right? It may take a little bit of time. You guys, when you do it, you'll give it some time. And once it's downloaded, you're going to want to extract it onto your flash drive. And this is something that you'll save on your work so that you don't have to do it over and over again. In the case of people that are using an online syncing, whether it's OneDrive or Google Drive or something like that instead of a flash drive, it's fine to put it on there, but recognize it's always going to take time to download all this each time you come in and use the computers. Okay? So it's continuing. Once it's done, do make sure that you actually extract it. So if I go here and I thought I had it. Sorry, I thought I already downloaded it here. Here it is, VRay Materials. Okay? It's a zip file right now, which you can't read. So I have to right-click and go to Extract All, and then I'm going to choose where to put it. So I'll click on Browse. I want to go to my flash drive. I like to keep it in a folder called Resources. And so in Resources, I have a folder called VRay. Inside of that, I have a VRay Materials folder. And so that's where I store it, and I extract it. Once it's extracted, I can then look at those materials. So if I go to my File Explorer here, we'll go to Resources, VRay, VRay Materials. There they are. And so we have a variety of categories of material, from flooring, interior walls, metals, sidings, etc. So this is a bunch of materials that you probably will find useful, or at least that I try to make them useful. Okay? And so what I'm encouraging you to do is today download this whole package, make sure it gets extracted, and then I want to show you how to load these materials. Okay? So we don't actually have to edit the materials or create them from scratch. Instead, we can load them. So I'm going to go back to my VRay material editor, and I'm going to start to load some new materials. So right now I have blue, green, orange, pink, and red. If I right-click on Seam Materials, instead of creating a new material, I'm going to go to Load Material. And when I click Load Material, I'll go to my flash drive. I'll go to my Resources folder. I'll go to VRay. I'll go to VRay Materials. And then I can pick from within, right, these various categories. So for example, I could go to Metal. Inside of Metal, I could pick Gold. And then I get Gold Blurry, Gold Matte, Regular Gold, and White Gold. Okay, so a couple different options. So I'm going to pick just regular gold. And I'll go ahead and click on Open. Okay, so then gold shows up here. If I look at gold and I preview it, it looks like gold. Right? Pretty cool. So I didn't have to go through and manually adjust these settings. And if you look here, gold, right, is made up of a reflection, a secondary reflection, and a diffuse. The person who made gold created it that way. Okay? And if we were looking at it, we could dive in and we could see the various adjustments that they made to the highlight glossiness and the reflection glossiness. You would have, if you were creating this from scratch, you would obviously have to figure out what these settings are to make it look the way gold looks. But good news is you don't have to, right? It's a known material and somebody's already created it. So now that I've gone ahead and loaded gold, it's a matter of selecting an object, right-clicking on gold, and saying apply material to selection. And that then becomes a gold object. So there it is. Again, the render view in Rhino doesn't make it look much like gold. Okay? So let's go ahead and load some other materials. So I'll go back to material. I'll go to C materials. I'll right-click. I'll say load material. And instead of picking a metal this time, I don't know, let's pick concrete. Okay? Let's do a no seams concrete. There it is. If I look at it, it looks like concrete. And so now I can pick one of these shapes. Right? Let's take this cone, and I'll apply material to selection. There it is, applied to that. So let's load a few more. Right? And you'll do this with 5 total materials. Load material. And part of the reason that I'm encouraging you to do this is because you can play around with different things and you can see what happens. The materials won't necessarily look correct because we haven't talked about something called texture mapping, which is how the material is applied to the object. So like the concrete may look too big for the object. Those kinds of things will correct the next time we talk about VRay. So bear with it a little bit. Okay? So maybe I'll pick something else. Let's do porcelain. We'll do a white porcelain, okay, which happens to be one of my favorite materials for doing models. I really like it. So let me pick my object here. I'm going to right-click and apply material to selection. It's going to become a white porcelain. Okay? You're going to go through and you're going to assign these materials, and then once you're done, you will render it. I would, however, caution you to stay away from glass. Right? Everybody always wants to do glass right away. And to make glass look good takes a lot of practice. And you have to do certain things about how you model glass and whatever. So I would stay away from glass right now. We'll get to it. Try the other materials first. When you're done loading the materials, go ahead and click on the render button. And you'll have your materials load. So in this case, my gold is rendering out, but you see how the top is black? The reason it's black is because the sky is black right now. We have no environment. So in reality, gold, if it was outside, gold would reflect a little bit of the sky, the clouds, etc., because it's very shiny. But in our world here, we don't have any of that just yet. So we're going to go ahead and just stick with a black top. That's fine. Okay? So it is what it is. All right? And we can see the reflection of the concrete and what have you. So I want you to go through and I want you to play around with materials, load 5 different materials, and then go ahead and save this again as your last file here as number 6. Okay? Once you feel comfortable with that, you can go ahead and open your file from last class, the one with the building with the walls. See if you can apply a material to that and render it. Okay? When you're all done with all of that, you're going to go ahead and make a post to the course website. Most of you were in my 135 class, so you remember posting as a slideshow, as a gallery. If you don't remember or you weren't in that class, written on the back is how you do it. Okay? But I'll go through it right now just in case. I'm going to go to New, Post, and we'll call this Exercise 204. Right? On the right side here, before I do anything else, let's categorize it as Exercise 204. Excellent. Then under Format, I'm going to go ahead and click on Gallery. When I click on Gallery, you see that this slideshow on post page shows up. I'm going to check the box to have it show up. Below that is Add Images to Post. I'll click on Add Images to Post. Brings up a little uploader. I'll click Select Files. And let me go to the files that I just saved. There they are. I'll hold down Shift and select them all at once. Say Open. And it will run through and upload these. The truth is that these renderings are very small in size. So it should go rather quickly. I'll click on Save All Changes, and I'll close this. At this point, it still won't let me post because I have no featured image. So let me scroll all the way down to the bottom, click Set Featured Image. You will see, though, that the images that I just uploaded will show up there. We'll check that, and we'll say Set Featured Image. And it will show up in a second. There it is. And at that point, I can just click on Publish. Okay. The weird thing is that nothing shows up in the actual box. And those of you that were in 135 remember that. Okay. I'll go ahead and click on Publish. It will publish. That's great. I didn't write anything, so there are no errors. Once it's done publishing, we hope, there we go, I can click on View Post, and there we go. There's my little slideshow. I can toggle through all the renderings that I did. Okay? So if you have trouble with that, no big deal. I can help you do that part of the post. But the purpose today is to become a little bit familiar with VRay and to be able to load materials and to understand some of the basics about materials. Okay? You should be able to get through it rather quickly. It's not a particularly long exercise, but take your time and make sure you really understand this, because as we move forward, we're going to build on what we talked about today. Okay? Are there any questions? No? All right. Yeah. Is it personal or for everybody?
Not for everybody.
Yeah.
On this post,
Uh-huh.
does it need to be 6 render because I missed one of the saves?
It's okay. Just however many you got is fine.
Okay.
All right. There's another question. Okay, I'll come help you in a second. Any other everybody questions? No? All right.
Oh, one more.
Yes.
So does that mean that the material won't show up if we don't have the flash drive?
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that question. So when you go to do renderings, if you save your work, and it obviously has a material in it, depending on how the person created the material in the first place, it may or may not work without having the materials in the same location on the same drive letter, right, in your computer. So one of the things that you'll find in this class, and it's really annoying and it's a Windows thing, is that when you plug your flash drive into the computer, right, sometimes the drive letter changes. And you can find that if you go to my File Explorer here, and you go to this PC, your flash drive will show up as like removable disk, whatever, F. Okay? If you plug it into a different machine or you plug it into a different port, it may change to being drive G. If it changes to being drive G, Rhino won't know where those, or VRay won't know where the materials are anymore. Right? So pay attention to which drive it is. If you plug it in and you say, oh, it's always drive F and it shows up as G, unplug it and plug it into one of the other ports and see if you can get it to show up as F. Okay? It's easier than telling VRay where all the materials are again. Okay? Some materials, like gold, for example, don't rely on any external files and therefore will work no matter where they show up. Okay? You don't even have to keep track of it. Once it's loaded in, it will always render as gold. Some materials, like the concrete, rely on a photograph as the basis for some of the texture, right? To get the correct colors and whatever. Those are the ones that you can lose along the way if the drive letter changes or if you don't re-download the file or whatever. And so I can help you through it, and it'll become more obvious as time goes on. But do keep track of where these are, and that's why I recommend saving it on your flash drive, because then you know you have that particular material down the road. Okay? We will spend a lecture really working through materials and creating materials from scratch and being able to create concrete, for example. I'll show you how to do that, but that's a little bit further down the road. Okay? Thank you for asking that. That was a good question.